public school is the instituted agency of socialism throughout every community.
The U.S. government has no authority to have any role in education.
We're going to lose our very republic if we don't stop this indoctrination of children in government schools.
What happened to us in China can't happen here.
Have one kind of education and then call it equity.
It's about outcomes. It's about trying to force us all to be equal.
I think we're going to have a race civil war in our hands.
We are exposing kids to pornography as early as kindergarten. Parents just don't know.
No, not anymore. Not anymore. Parents need to wake up. They don't have the interests of your child at heart.
Good morning, brothers and sisters in Christ. That was a trailer from the brand new documentary. It's called Truth and Lies in American Education. We've got Alex Newman right here with us this morning to talk about that and so much more. Of course, you know him from the Liberty Sentinel, also the New American Magazine, the Epic Times, and Freedom Project Media. He's journalist, author, educator, and he's also, he's the senior editor of the New American Magazine, and he's with us today to talk about public school exit as well. But Alex Newman, welcome back to the podcast, brother.
It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, brother.
Okay, before we dive into what people just heard, some of those clips from Truth and Lies in American Education, and just powerful, very important voices that people need to listen to. Tell us about Public School Exit.
Well, Public School Exit is a ministry that we founded. It kind of grew out of a national speaking tour I did in 2019. I loaded my family up with a travel trailer, and we went across the country. I spoke about 130 times across 43 different states, and actually ended up going to several different countries as well. Exposing what was going on in public schools and explaining to people what the Bible says about education, which at this point is completely incompatible with what passes for education in the government's indoctrination centers. So we got together with a wonderful team of people, including former leaders in the education field. One of our founding board members was the superintendent of public instruction for the state of Arizona. So she was the top education official for the state of Arizona. The most recent one, I think she stepped down in 2020. We had E. Ray Moore, who has been basically calling for people to get out of the public schools for over 20 years now. He's the founder of the Exodus Mandate. We had Dran Reese, who's the founder of the Salt and Light Council, and just this wonderful team, Rebecca Friedrichs, who helped take on the unions all the way to the Supreme Court. So we just built this wonderful team, and our goal is to show churches and parents, first of all, why they need to get out of the public schools, and then second of all, to facilitate that transition. So we're working with churches across the country and even outside of the United States now to help them build life rafts to start evacuating the families from the sinking ship that is the government indoctrination system.
Thank you, Alex, and I pray that there's still time. I mean, at this point, I pray that there's still time for parents to take these steps and do this. It's absolutely necessary, and you're going to talk about the condition of some of the schools and what they're actually teaching, and I put teaching in air quotes. So the website, publicschoolexit.com, publicschoolexit.com. Got a news release about a week ago, actually less than that, from United States Parents Involved in Education, USPIE. Parents are labeled abusive over gender identity indoctrination. And there's a film that equips parents to fight back, and it's called Truth and Lies in American Education. We just heard some of the clips. We've got some bullet points to talk about. Alex, give us an overview of that.
Well, it's a wonderful film. It was created by U.S. Parents Involved in Education. Dr. Duke Pesta and I serve on the advisory board there with Michelle Malkin and many other wonderful individuals. And it's really a fascinating story. It kind of tells you what's going on in the public schools through the lens of, through the personal story of the communications director of USPI, who went through this experience of learning what was happening there and just being absolutely shocked. And actually, I'm very honored that it begins a book that I wrote with Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld almost a decade ago now, called Crimes of the Educators. And she's kind of reading this. Her mom, who is the founder of USPI, Sherry Few, had given her a copy and told her to read it. And she's just astounded, and she doesn't actually believe what she's reading. So she goes and she starts researching this stuff, and she realizes, whoa, it's all true. And, man, this system is horrific. So it's kind of her journey learning about all of these things. intermixed with what's happening in the public schools. It's a very, very well done film. I highly encourage people to get a copy for themselves and then some extra ones to share with your pastor, with folks at your church, with your neighbors, because, this is a crisis that affects every single American, even if you don't have school-age children, even if your children are not in the government school system. This is a tsunami hitting our country, and we need to be sounding the alarm, and this film is really a great tool for doing that.
Alex, one more thing. I'm going to hand it over to Mary after this question. It just seems like all of a sudden this stuff is coming out about what parents can and cannot do, opting out or whatever, and whether they have rights to speak into their child's curriculum in the government-run schools. It seems like it happened suddenly, but this has been in the works for, 100 years?
Yeah, it really has. One of the things that I have tried to do is show people how we got this system. There's just this sense among Americans today that this system is just how it is and how it should be and how it always has been, and nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, prior to World War I, most Americans were still primarily homeschooled. This whole idea that the government should indoctrinate and educate our children is really a new innovation. For almost 2,000 years of church history, it was always understood that parents were the primary educators of their children.
Yes.
And to the extent that there needed to be some outside assistance, you bring in grandma, grandpa, aunts and uncles, older siblings, neighbors, tutors, and the church. The idea that government would be involved in education, aside from Plato's ramblings in the Republic, where he wanted, this very bizarre concept of philosopher kings and government schools. I mean, other than those rantings, the first guy to really seriously propose government education was a anti-Christian utopian communist named Robert Owen. This is a guy who wrote all these weird essays in the early 1800s calling for government education. And, of course, we didn't have government education in America at that time, so people were not thrilled with this idea. It's a really fascinating story. To his credit, at least this guy truly believed in the nonsense he was spewing. He did start a communist commune in Indiana called New Harmony, and it failed after less than 2 years because, of course, communism doesn't work. It's unbiblical. But this grew. He actually started a movement, a whistleblower who had become an organizer for his cause in the state of New York, ended up defecting. He ended up becoming a Catholic and repenting of this wickedness he had participated in this effort to have Americans hand their children over to government schools. And so he wrote this big expose of what they were doing. He said the secret society was modeled on the Carbonari of Europe, of Italy primarily, and that their goal was to get public opinion shifted so that Americans would be willing to give their children to government for education, and also to get men elected to the legislatures who would support the idea of government education. And then he said the ultimate objective, this is the whistleblower speaking, he said the ultimate objective of this whole idea of government schools was to destroy Christianity. Okay, so that's a whistleblower who participated in the movement to first push government education in this country and really in the world. Now, it didn't catch on early on in America, but these essays that Robert Owen was writing were picked up by the ambassador from Prussia. He took them back to the dictator of Prussia, who, according to Robert Owen's autobiography, so much approved of these ideas that he ordered his interior minister to set up a government school system.
Wow.
First ever example that I can find of education of the state, by the state, and for the state. So this gets re-imported into Massachusetts by Horace Mann, another utopian who rejected the Bible. And then it gets further weaponized by John Dewey, an actual communist, a guy who visited the Soviet Union and couldn't stop raving about how wonderful it was, a guy who founded what he and his buddies believed was a new religion. They wrote the Humanist Manifesto, which, for some perspective, aside from the communism, they say we need to get rid of the profit motive. We need to have equitable distribution of the means of life. I mean, this is just straight out of the Communist Manifesto. The very first plank of their new religion, and I'm quoting verbatim, we religious humanists believe the universe is self-existing and not created. And, of course, the Bible teaches that in the beginning, God created. So Dewey's religion was obviously incompatible with Christianity, but he wanted to use the public school system to advance his new religion. He was so successful that by the early 1960s, the Supreme Court basically established this false religion from hell as the national religion of the United States, forced us to fund its propagation in taxpayer-funded government schools. And, the rest is history. We see the fruit now. Our society is collapsing. Our children are killing themselves and each other and their babies, and they're getting addicted to drugs. And we see the fruit all around us. It's a horror show.
Yes, and by the way, I'm going to hand it over to Mary. This is not something that, again, it's not new. And forgive us for the people that have been listening to this podcast for years. This might seem redundant, some of this, but there are always so many newer listeners, and there's always these reminders that we need to strongly encourage people to get educated and find out what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking of getting educated, I see on the news release for the USPIE film, it starts out talking about parents are outraged by a recent proclamation from Cincinnati government schools instructing teachers to consider reporting child abuse to Child Protective Services if a student's parents are unsupportive of his or her gender identity.
Wow.
And it says that, finally enraged Americans are really starting to speak out against this sort of thing. Also another article, Maryland School District bars parents from opting children out of LGBT book lessons, prompting lawsuit. It says, on Tuesday, a group of 6 Christian and Muslim parents filed a federal lawsuit against the Montgomery County Board of Education over the Maryland School District's decision to revoke the right of parents to be able to opt their children out of lessons that include the use of books promoting gender ideology and other sexual themes. They're basically saying, we know what's best for your kids. They must learn to be more LGBTQ inclusive. And, okay, so why is the burden of proof on parents to show that they love their kids? They're presuming that the parents are going to come against this, and they probably will, rightly so. They're the parents of these children. So why is the burden of proof on the parents to show that they love their kids? And also, the article says, why does sexual information from a left-wing political group, which is what the schools have become, rate as academic content in the first place?
That's
Alex,
right.
Is this in all the states? I mean, you probably don't know this, but what can parents do? Can they do their homework? 'Cause I think they need to, in every single state, find out, is this sort of thing part of, the public schools in my state? What's the easiest route for parents to go? Is it just to do some research on that?
Well, yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. This is happening all over the country. In fact, this is happening all over the Western world, and it's actually part of a broader trend, and that is removing parental rights, removing parental authority over children, and transferring that authority to government. This is not the first time in human history that we've seen this. Adolf Hitler very openly did this. Joseph Stalin, Chairman Mao, Pol Pot, Fidel Castro. Right, we've seen this movie before where parents are sidelined. And actually the Biden administration has been very, very clear on this. They've said repeatedly, in fact, President Biden himself has said repeatedly over just the last few months that, there's no such thing as your children. These are all of our children. These are the nation's children. I mean, this is exactly the kind of rhetoric that we saw from people like Adolf Hitler, and they're using the transgender issue as one of the ways to advance this idea. And so they laid the groundwork for this back during the Obama administration. But what they're arguing is that if your child identifies as a new gender, whether that be, tree or female, male, or non-binary or whatever, pick, they have infinite genders now. But if your child identifies as a new gender and you are not supportive, you are a danger to your children. You're a threat to the well-being of your children. Wow. And so they have been training child protection services all across the country with this attitude. They've been teaching teachers this attitude. And in fact, we broke some major stories. I broke a story last summer in the Epic Times about a mother in a very conservative district in northern Colorado, the Poudre School District. They had convinced her 12-year-old daughter to stay after school for what was alleged to be an art club. They convinced her that she was a transgender because she wasn't fully comfortable in her own body. And, what pubescent girl is fully comfortable in her own body?
Right.
They told her she was a transgender. They told her that she couldn't talk to her parents about this because her parents were not a safe space. Well, being a good daughter, she went and she told her parents what these maniacs had done to her and what they had told her. So the parents yanked her out of school. And the school district, we've got the emails, they plotted to send the CPS to her house because she wasn't being supported. So they're saying if you won't support the castration of your son, if you won't support hysterectomies and double mastectomies for your young daughter, you are a threat to their well-being. They've got these junk studies claiming that the kids might be more likely to commit suicide if their parents won't support them. And it's hard to overstate the danger from this. This is an absolute atrocity. And let me tell you just real quick the ending to that story. So the parents pulled the daughter out of school. They put her into a Christian school. And, it became a national scandal. Actually, after our article, I was contacted by Tucker Carlson's producers, Glenn Beck's producers. They ended up putting this mother on national television. This became a huge national scandal. The school district backed down a little bit. Well, I did a follow-up, a few months ago now. People can go read it. They had gotten rid of their LGBT activist who had told this little girl that she was transgender. Well, it turns out they replaced her with a new individual, and it didn't take very long on her social media to figure out this was a self-proclaimed, shape-shifting, genderqueer blood witch who, actually a professional witch. She teaches people witchcraft. Yep. It's one of the ways she makes her money. She's got pictures of herself all over the internet, painting in blood on the walls, these very bizarre demonic rituals. So yeah, their version of backing down was bringing on an actual blood witch to teach the kids LGBTism and to do professional development for the teachers. So even when you think that they're backing down, Mom and Dad, they are doubling down every time, and this is true all over the country.
Alex, was that in Fort Collins, Colorado? Do you remember?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yep, just outside Fort Collins, yep.
Okay, because I saw another headline that says parents sue school district after their kids were traumatized by secret gender change club. So yeah, there are other stories like that, but I want to go back to truth and lies in American education and talk about a couple of the bullet points, such as standardized tests being used for data collection. We talked about that way back when Common Core was unleashed in 2009, 2010. So let's just start there about data collection. Now we're talking about the information on a child and possibly their family as well. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the data collection has become so massive, I don't think any reasonable parent can comprehend. They are gathering data on the most intimate things happening even in your child's mind. And as you pointed out, Dave, this is something that I've been exposing for over a decade.
Yep.
In fact, I've got reports from the U.S. Department of Education where they're touting some of the technologies that they're now using. And again, this was like 2013. They had, to give you an example, a facial expression monitor camera. And this was already in use in 2013 in some federally funded education projects. They're basically exposing children to different stimuli. These facial expression monitor cameras are monitoring their facial expressions to determine their response to that stimuli, feeding that data through an algorithm, and then determining whether the child needs an intervention to make sure they have the right attitude. So let me give you some examples.
Sure.
Let's say the school has determined that you have to support abortion to have empathy, or that you have to support abortion to have compassion. And this is exactly what they're doing, right? This is not a hypothetical example. This is exactly what they're doing in classrooms across America. So they've determined that your child needs to believe abortion is a human right and it needs to be legal and taxpayer funded to be an empathetic and compassionate person. And they're now measuring empathy and compassion through their social emotional learning programs. So your child is sitting on a device and is being exposed to, say, hypothetical court rulings or proposed laws dealing with abortion. And if your child has the wrong reaction, wrong as defined by them, then the algorithms will infer this from their facial expressions and from other response mechanisms that the body puts out and determine that, hey, this child doesn't have the correct attitude. This child believes that abortion is wrong. This child believes that marriage is between a man and a woman. This child believes that we ought to have some sort of border enforcement to keep our nation relatively sovereign. And so all of these attitudes are considered wrong. So these are the types of things that are being collected by the system right now. Artificial intelligence is being rapidly rolled out to process all of this data, to make sense of it, to weaponize it. And so everything from your children's dental health to their mental health to their test scores to surveys about, how does daddy talk to mommy? Does anyone smoke at your house? Do people drink at your house? What kind of food do you have in the refrigerator? All of this is being collected, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of data points on every child. And this is being weaponized, and it will be further weaponized in the years ahead. Again, it's hard to overstate the enormity of this threat.
Wow. Incredible. I want to ask you, Alex, now to talk about history. It seems like they've been rewriting history to remake America. They've been doing this for decades. And there was a book that came out. I forgot all about this. I would love for you to speak to it for a minute, how so many people still look at Howard Zinn and A People's History of the United States as something that is true when actually, unfortunately, it's Marxist propaganda. Speak to us about Zinn and the rewriting of public school textbooks.
So Zinn is actually the best-selling, to this day, history textbook. Millions and millions of his propaganda books have been sold. They're being used in public school classrooms. They're being used in public school curricula all across the country. And you're right, they've been totally and completely debunked. No serious scholar believes this nonsense any more than any serious scholar believes the 1619 Project nonsense. It's totally fraudulent. It is fiction. And even left-wing historians have repeatedly come out and said, look, this guy's like just literally making stuff up. None of this even happened. And yet this is the vision, this is the view of history that's being taught, because it's not really about teaching history, right? It's about undermining oppression as they see it, right? They've got this idea, critical theory, where you need to be relentlessly critical of all institutions. Everything needs to be examined through the lens of power and privilege and oppression and oppressor. And so what you have is a totally fraudulent version of history being taught to our children, where, and it's actually the exact opposite of what really happened, right? And so I can give you a very clear example of this. America was the first nation in human history founded on what our founding fathers said was the self-evident truth that all men were created equal. Prior to that time, virtually every culture in every time, in every part of the world, practiced some sort of slavery. And yet here comes this nation. It's founded by Christians, largely Christians, who say, nope, God created us equally. God gave us each rights, the right to liberty, the right to life, the right to property, etc. And we're going to found a country based on this ideal. And so these ideas that the country was founded on actually set in motion for the first time in human history a genuine abolition movement. Americans became the first people on planet Earth in all of human history to ban slavery. Now, we didn't ban it entirely as a nation, but many of our states banned slavery long before the British did it under the leadership of William Wilberforce. Then the British did it. Again, the British abolitionists were inspired by American abolitionists who, again, were just discerning biblical principles and enshrining those principles in governing documents. And so America and Britain, based on these ideas, abolished slavery not just in our own countries, but all around the world. Now, it took a long time, right? Saudi Arabia didn't end slavery until about the 1950s, 1960s. There are parts of Africa where slavery was still legal up to 15 years ago, right? In Mauritania, you could still buy and sell slaves legally up until 2007. And so kids are being taught not that America set in motion, based on biblical principles, the train that eventually ended slavery, legally at least, around the world. They're being taught that America practically invented slavery and that every horror that could ever be imaginable was invented by America's founding fathers. So they're getting history exactly backwards, and this is what Howard Zinn and the 1619 Project and other fake historians are peddling.
Thank you. Thank you for laying that out so clearly and reminding people of the true history. Because you're right, Alex. You know, kids are not being taught that, and they're now going from the 1619 Project to critical race theory and others. A quick question about equity in education. And I have to put that word in air quotes due to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion through the university system, but also in the public schools. How have they redefined equity and used that to further their agenda?
Well, equity today, when used by the people running the public school system, basically means communism. I mean, it's just that simple. Equity is, of course, a term they stole from the Bible. You know, the correct meaning of equity is actually a good thing. But this is what they've been doing for so long. They take terms, they redefine them, and they do this across the spectrum, right? Like, for example, racism. We all think we know what racism means. Not when they say it, right? They mean something totally different than we do. And so that's what they've done with equity. When you hear equity from these people, you need to understand they are talking about communism. And this goes back right to the very beginning of the history of the public school system. If you go back to Robert Owen, he wanted communism. If you go back to Horace Mann, he said publicly in his own writings he wanted the public school system to equalize all men. If you go back to John Dewey and read his writings, again, an ardent believer in government-enforced equality. And I hope people will understand that government-enforced equality is literally incompatible and completely at odds with human freedom. You cannot be both free and have government-enforced equality. in terms of equality of outcomes, et cetera. Some people want to work harder. Some people want to work less. Some people are smarter. Some people are dumber. The moment you say everybody must have the same everything is the moment you completely eliminate all human freedom. And that's what they're talking about here with the term equity.
And I remember you talking about that in the movie, Truth and Lies in American Education. In that film, you kind of laid that out and explained their justification because of different kids' levels or backgrounds or abilities. They said, okay, we want all of them to be equal. That's where equity comes in. Mayor?
I'm still thinking about the children, you know, all their opinions and their ideas and how they think about this. What food is in the refrigerator? I'm still thinking about that because you
mean the data collection?
The data collection aspect of it. You know, we did standardized tests as young people too, and you know, it was a day off of classes. We didn't give it much thought. But I'm pondering that because now they practically own your soul at this point. And it's not just race, it's not just equity or unity through religion. I mean, a lot of those sound good and they're all very superficial, but this is not superficial. Alex, you said I can't overstate the importance of this. You're not kidding. And I'm thinking so they basically own this child's soul. I mean, is that where we're going with this? You know, making everything equal and everything on a complete equal level, but what's in the refrigerator and all that? That just blows my mind.
Yeah, what's your thermostat at? What kind of products do you use at home? Do your parents believe that book, the Bible, and all that? What do you think, Alex?
That is nail on the head. I mean, that is where this is going. And in fact, you know, the concept of owning their soul, it sounds like hyperbole. It's actually not. One of the biggest recent articles I've done on this education, I did it for the New American. This was in January of 2023. UN pushing New Age spirituality on school children with SEL and neuroscience. What you'll find is that a major goal, a major objective of the people who are pushing these things, and they say this publicly, right? You don't have to get into their sneaky smoke-filled rooms to figure out what they're doing. They're saying this publicly in their reports. They want to bring our children into this one world religion, this one world spirituality. They're using social-emotional learning to accomplish this. And the people who are, I know this sounds like bad science fiction, but again, all of this is verifiable. I can send you the videos. You can read the documents yourself.
Yes.
The people who are pushing this are openly telling you that they are in communication with spiritual entities. Some of them call them ascended masters. They're doing very bizarre rituals. And yet there's an entire agency within UNESCO, the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, that is dedicated to mainstreaming this concept of social emotional learning in schools all over the world. Wow. And they tell you that the goal is to bring children into this one world spirituality, to bring them into this new concept of values and ethics and attitudes and morality. And we are quite literally talking about evil from the pit of hell. And it doesn't take long for a discerning Christian to read through these documents and figure out, wow, this is horrific, this is monstrous, and yet it's happening to our children all over the world, not just in America.
Well, we've only got about 10 minutes left with Alex Newman, but we've got to take a break. And what you said is very important. It's not just the mothership of the National Education Association. We're talking about the UN, the United Nations, and the globalists there and the Marxists that are impacting, influencing education and what's happening to America's children. So we've got a lot more with Alex Newman. When we come back, we're going to talk about the biblical battle versus evil, education, Christianity in the U.S. He really laid out some great information at Reawaken America and the Liberty Sentinel on just some points that we need to be aware of. We'll just touch on a few because we're not going to have a lot of time. But I do want to end with a quote from Benjamin Rush. You guys are not going to believe this. But before we take our break, Benjamin Rush said, "The great enemy of the salvation of man, in my opinion, never invented a more effectual means of extinguishing Christianity from the world than by persuading mankind that it was improper to read the Bible at schools." Benjamin Rush. And a lot more quotes like that by our founding fathers, Fisher Ames, Noah Webster, and so many more that you can look up. And so we have to be aware. History has been rewritten. There is a war against the family and, of course, against Christianity and God's truth. We'll touch on some of these things when we come back with Alex Newman. Keep it right here.